Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to today's webinar about restarting meetings in the COVID-19 era. My name is Barbara Scafidio and I'm the editor of Prevue magazine, and I will be your moderator for the afternoon. I'd like to start by introducing three very special guests. Very excited to have them here. We've got Mark Cooper, CEO of IAC. Hello, Mark, from the UK. 6 o'clock time. We've got Desi Whitney, president and co-founder, Emergency Concierge International, who I will actually be working with on a program in early 2021.
Hello.
Hi, Desi. Welcome. And Bradley Metrock, CEO of Score Publishing, who has lots of tales to tell from his perspective as a planner. So welcome to you, Bradley, as well. And where are you based, Bradley?
In Nashville, Tennessee. And Barbara, thanks for allowing me to be part.
Thrilled to have you here. Let me just take a couple of minutes to introduce some very important sponsors and do a little housekeeping, and we'll get started. I do want to thank today's sponsors. This event wouldn't have been possible without them, and you can see them on your screen. Florida's Paradise Coast, Fairmont, Austin, Alexandria, and Seabourn. Thank you so much for being a part of today's event, and I hope you're on and are enjoying it too. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. During the presentation, feel free to enter your questions into the question box. I'm going to be gathering them together. We will share some throughout this conversation. This is really going to be a free-form discussion, and we will also address the questions formally at the toward the end, the last 15 minutes or so. If you do get called away and can't finish the webinar, it's being recorded and you will be receiving the link via email to access it at your leisure. Everyone on the call will receive one CEU from the Events Industry Council for being a part of today's event. So why don't we start out and just do a little self-introduction, go around the panel, and why don't you tell me a little about how your lives have changed in the past 6 months? We'll start with you, Desi.
Okay, hi, thank you so much for having me today. And goodness, how has life changed, right? Pretty significantly in the past 6 months. It's a loaded question, yeah. And I would touch on, my personal life, first and foremost, because that's the foundation for me for everything. And I've got an 11-year-old son who was, sent home from school in March. And so I had my little Klingon for 6 months, and he was here, transitioned to virtual school and then home all summer, no camps and anything like that, while I'm working and operating and taking conference calls and that sort of thing. So that was probably the biggest, personal, I'm not sure it's a challenge necessarily, but maybe an opportunity for new discovery and whatnot. So he's actually back in person school. So that's interesting, just the past couple weeks, but and that was a good experience. We'll actually never get that time back. So 6 months, kind of one-on-one, and him hearing my conference calls, and the work that I'm doing in our space, which is pretty fun. So yeah, a little bit about me personally on that front. And then professionally, I would say ACI is all hazards emergency management. Response to infectious diseases was already part of our plan, and so we've just enhanced upon that.
Terrific. We'll move on to you, Mark.
Okay, well, I'm going to equally kick off with the light-hearted part. And Desi, I can relate to you, apart from the fact that my 17 and 20-year-old son and daughter, probably after lockdown, are even more anxious to move and get their own house now. So, every cloud has a silver lining, right? But equally, I don't think, being a traveler, I don't think there's any year that's going to be quite like this year, in the sense that I've been able to tend to my vegetable garden. So it's never looked better, and it will never look better again as soon as I hop on those aeroplanes and and start neglecting it. From a professional perspective, wow, I represent an association that represents venues that hold meetings and conferences, so our world has turned upside down, and I think the last thing I probably thought I would be doing is delivering from a production standpoint our global conference from the room literally right behind me here, which turned into the closest it ever wants to get to being a TV studio. And I felt the heat as it related to what these morning TV presenters must feel like when they go on air every year. So interesting to say the least, but character building at the same time.
Character building. That's a good way to describe the past 6 months for all of us. Bradley, welcome. Why don't you share a little bit as well?
Sure. Yeah, Barbara, thank you for letting me be part of this event. So my name is Bradley Metrock. I'm CEO of a company called Score Publishing based in Nashville, Tennessee. We're not a normal publisher by any stretch of the imagination. Most of what we do centers around the universe of voice technology and AI. I'm here just as somebody who has a business that a major revenue stream of ours pre-COVID, old world, were events in person. And, this year has been a challenging year. I don't have to tell anybody that. It started for us, Project Voice is our big event. It's the #1 event in the space. We were able to execute that in January as things were setting in. For many, almost every single person who was there, thousands of people were there. I've been told over and over again, that was the last thing I ever had a chance to go to before everything started shutting down. We had an event that was supposed to be in San Jose in April, went virtual. We had an event that was supposed to be at Harvard Medical School in August, had to go virtual. We had an event that was supposed to be in Nashville in September, had to go virtual. And we have an event that's supposed to be in New York City in November, going to be virtual. And we're going to make our stand in April of next year with Project Voice. The event that was in January, we moved it to April, which is a better time for several different reasons. And we're going to plant the flag and make our stand returning to physical events at that point in time. So been a tough year, been a challenging year. Been a transformative year. Excited for 2021.
I think we all are. We're ready to leave 2020 behind. So I would love to take the pulse of the audience and get to know who you, hundreds of you out there, are as well. So we have 3 poll questions we're going to do in succession, and if everything works well, you'll vote. We'll be able to see your results on screen, and you'll also know who's in the audience. So question 1, have you already held a live meeting since the COVID outbreak? Yes or no? If you could take a second and answer that, and we will come back to you with the results. And okay, so we do have 13% out there of you brave souls who've done a live meeting. That's terrific. Next question, are you in the process of planning a hybrid event or hybrid events? We could put that question up there. There we go. I am guessing that is going to be the vast majority, but let's see what happens. And we can talk about that later too, but it certainly is hard to believe that we won't have that aspect to our events for the coming year. And the answer is, okay, 51% yes, 49% no. Finally, are you considering breaking up a large event to smaller regional ones? If you wouldn't mind voting on that. Yes or no. We'll have the answer in a second. And okay, this is a very split audience. So yes, 33%. And maybe we can all talk about what's going on with our own panelists. So it's very tricky to know where to start. And I don't really want to start with virtual because this is really about restarting with live events. So everybody in the panel except for Bradley has, Desi and Mark have experience with live events. I'd like to hear so far, and we're very early on, what you have found are some important lessons that your clients or your members, in the case of IAC, have learned as we start. Whichever of you wants to go first, maybe you, Mark.
I'd be happy to, as I feel that sometimes we're privileged in the sense that some of the venues and meeting venues that are within our association in 26 countries never closed. Countries like Sweden did not close, so they continued with meetings. So we have got a interesting perspective to be able to draw upon experiences. It was great to see 13% have actually run events in these, in this environment as well, because our audience share that as well. I think one of the most important lessons that we have seen as a result of all of this is that we're very sure from an industry perspective that the venues create a safe and hospitable environment. The amount of energy and focus that went into that very early on, and the parallels and the learning that we took from other industries really, set up some great safe havens for meetings. Where the blockage is still in the system in terms of that translating into demand, even when government restrictions do lift, has been really in satisfying any concerns over traveling and getting to the venues, so taking the tube, taking the train, and also potentially organizations relaxing their travel policies internally to allow people to attend meetings as well. So that's one of the challenges that we still have to face, is the getting to the meeting, and not necessarily the environment that's created when a business event takes place. Would be a couple I'd draw out, but many more, I'm sure, as we go through the conversation.
Right. And Desi, you and your team have been on site.
Yes, and so that statistic I find super fascinating. So if you think about that, I love your positivity, Mark. 13% have had meetings, so that's awesome. And then I go to 87% have not yet, and a lot of people need a lot of help kind of navigating through all of these new questions. And it seems like this current time there are more questions than answers on the planning side, and totally wholeheartedly agree that the industry jumped in and did an amazing job with all of the clean initiatives, and I think the sharing of information. And hotels were clean before, venues were clean before, right? But now we're just kind of taking it up a notch, and then certainly advertising and making it very visible as to what's happening. And then also making sure that, we're all doing our part. And so I think as we move forward, it's going to be important for those 87%ers to be having conversations and being exposed to this. It's really a new lens, and it's almost like learning a foreign language. So if you're a planner and you've been planning meetings for 25 years, you're about to plan a meeting that you've never planned before. And so you haven't had the experience yet. And so that's what we, I think need to be talking about and collaborating on, is how do we, what questions do we ask? How do we think about our new agenda, new approaches? What creative solutions can we put together so that way we can move things forward in a safe way? And it's all going to look different, depending on size of meeting and comfortability of the attendee and a million different other factors, the venue, of course, but it can happen.
Yeah, what I think would be really instructive is to walk through the process. And, the process starts way before we get to a venue. Bradley had some pretty interesting experiences with facilities and requirements and requests. Can you tell us about some of these programs you are planning and what you've done at the contracting stage in terms of safety and steps that you're requiring facilities to take?
So we've done a few different things over the course of 2020. We had an event that we were going to do, which was in August. This event we do that's all about voice and AI and modern healthcare that typically takes place at Harvard Medical School. Well, Harvard Medical School's closed, through Labor Day, as we discovered. So that was out, and so we had been in regular contact with a healthy quorum of the attendees and sponsors and partners, and there was interest in still having it. A lot of people were in Boston. They wouldn't have to get on a plane at that point in time. planes were a big wild card. No one wanted to get on them. You know, since then we sort of learned, hey, that's not where most people are getting sick at all, at least in the United States. So we were planning on moving forward, and we had done a lot of out of the box stuff. Very early on, we had managed to secure some testing, which you know, was hard to believe, but part of it being the nature of part of it being a healthcare conference made that possible, and some of the people we deal with. You know, we were going to do all sorts of things. We were going to have registration be in a different place. We were going to not have food, which is something we're going to continue to do, is not have food. We're going to do, you know, some version of you know, a mobile app that wouldn't have contact tracing, but would enable us to effectively find out from you if you're feeling sick, and then credit you back without you having to show up. I mean, there's a lot of things that we had put into place, and really had formed a great partnership with our venues along the way. The fundamental problem is, you know, people, despite whatever it is that they said, I will attend, I won't attend, when it came down to brass tacks, the will to meet in person was gone. And you know, you can say what you want about that. You know, you can make it political if you want, but the fact is that you can't meet in person if people don't want to meet in person. You can do all the things you want to do, and that's what we ran into in August. So we just had to turn it virtual, and we did that, and it was successful. But it was challenging, you know, because you're having all of these conversations, which themselves are virtual, with all these different people and stakeholders, and you're trying your best to have things in person, and to take those steps toward restarting meetings, the name of the webinar. But you know, we've been sitting at home for a while. We've developed new habits. We've you know, they say that you know, for a lot of people, 21 days is what you need to break out of a habit and form new ones. For almost the long tail of that is, you know, 60 days. If you've been doing something or not doing something for 60 days, almost every human on the planet will have new habits at that point. And so when it comes time to restarting meetings, we have no muscle memory anymore. Everything will be new. There will be trepidation. There will be people who absolutely refuse. And it's just a challenging environment that'll have to be baked into the economics of everything that anyone's trying to do.
I think Bradley's point's a fair one as well, in relation to, we know that this is going to be a long path, and we're not going to rebound at the speed that we originally thought when you know, back in March and April. However, what I will do is I'll maybe draw some parallels to some of our behaviours as it relates to wanting to get back together again. So if there's positivity to be taken from some of those cities and countries that have reopened restaurants, you know, in the United Kingdom, this summer restaurants have never been busier. You just could not get into a restaurant to have a meal. We wanted to get back to that level of normality. And I don't know if it's just the circles that I operate in, LinkedIn, but how many stories and pictures are there of small groups of people getting back together, the teams back together, we met outside. I think there is that desire to get back together. But as Bradley said, you know, you have got some of these barriers still in the way. And maybe as an industry, our appetite is for us to get back to very large meetings and conventions and everything that we enjoyed over the years. We're going to have to take the steps, regional small meetings, smaller national meetings. You know, it's not to get frustrated that we don't bounce back, but have a methodical and planned out return for recovery that's got confidence at the heart of all of it. And we're starting to see some of those taking place. My backdrop on Zoom was a 250-person conference that took place last week in Stockholm. It was a business event that we are starting to see some of these pilot events come back, and without issue, which is great to see.
Right. And hearing afterwards that, you know, some of these, and maybe Desi, you can speak to this, but they're doing tracing after the event, and they're finding that everything's been fine. So Desi, along the lines of, you probably have the most experience with your company because you're servicing meetings that are happening right now that are live. And you used a great word, Mark. It was a synonym for trust. I think you said confidence. I think trust and communicating safety and protocols and building, and everything that's being done, all of the initiatives is key to building the confidence and the trust. Can you talk about some examples of how some of your clients are doing this, the ones who have started up?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, I agree with everything being said right now, and baby steps, I think, is what's going to happen as we move forward, and everyone is going to have a different comfort level with that travel process. And so that's why we're seeing those, more regional drive-in markets being successful. And then, there are some industries, some corporations that, just quite frankly can't tolerate the risk, that they've defined. And so, we have to honor that. And, for those that are ready to travel, just really communicating everything. And I think because we're in the industry, we're all dying to get back out there, and that's where our kind of risk threshold is. But then there are some people within the industry that are still not comfortable, and that is more a personal decision now so than ever before. So it's like, instead of getting your boss's approval to travel, you've probably got to get your household's approval to travel, and if your spouse and your children and the elderly people in your family are comfortable with, what you're up to and where you're going. But we've seen communication being the key, and it's budget obviously is going to come hugely into play. And I'll say that we always start with the foundation of the safety and security precautions, which is the things that the venues are doing, of course, in terms of cleaning. So when you look at the CDC recommendations, it's like, the 4 foundational things are, sanitizing of highly touched surfaces. That's certainly number 1. People washing their hands and using hand sanitizer. Physical distancing, so keeping space and wearing masks. And so if you start with that, which are all, I can't speak to it on your side, for example, Mark, I'm going to say relatively cost-effective things, not necessarily on the sanitation side. I don't know what that line item looks like, but for a planner's perspective. And then when you get on site, really looking at, okay, how many people do you have? How do we need to manage the flow and the traffic and buildup of people and what that looks like? Should we invest in plexiglass? And also really understanding the risk tolerance of the attendees that are going to attend. Are they comfortable with, okay, I will keep my distance, and so we can be a little bit more lenient on spending a lot of, money, making sure that we've got boundaries and barriers in place, or do we actually really need that structure maybe for a larger group to make sure that people are flowing accordingly? And the reminders, signage is such a big thing. And the thing that you said, Bradley, about, habits. How many times have we gone out to eat and gotten up from a restaurant, even though they say you need to have your mask on to go, use the restroom or walk around? You walk up, you get halfway there and you go, oh, shoot, I forgot, because that's our human nature. We're not used to this process. It happens in hotels, it's happening in meetings. And so the constant reminders are something that we see, as needed, because we are creatures of habits. So there's a lot of different things that people can spend money on, or or be cost effective on. And so I think that each individual meeting is going to require a different conversation, and then total partnership with the venue as well, to make sure that you're all working together in a new way and really communicating more significantly than ever before, and communicating the protocols that you are putting into place for the attendees, and then also the attendee accountability and what their piece is on that too. So making sure everyone understands, we as a conference organizer and a leadership team have decided that these are the protocols and the requirements that we're going to have on site, and here's what you can expect, whether it's testing or not, or temperatures or not, and masks and all that. And then here's the attendee accountability, and we need everyone to work together in order to pull off the safe event.
It's a really good point, Desi, because the way that we evaluate the suitability of that venue, that destination, and the point you made earlier was spot on. Everything has changed for both the venues, and equally everything has changed for the meeting professionals in terms of putting that on. It is like their very first meeting, and it makes it even more critical that the venue is there to cover the angles that you are not thinking about. So venue protocols, how they deal with a infection, how they're going to guide attendees through. What's the DNA of that venue? Is it has it got a lot of traffic, a lot of footfall, a lot of busy corridors, or is it, you know, well laid out and has got lots of room so people can respect social distancing? We put on a different lens now when we look at evaluating a venue's suitability. And to your last point, cost, of course, is something that is impacting all of us, but it's not sanitation, it's not you know, masks and the procedures and the protocols that are being put in. Everywhere has to do that. It's pretty much capacity. That's the one that really makes it challenging. But as long as meeting professionals, as we return to meetings, have that in mind as well, equally, and work with the venues, then you're going to have venues there at the end of it. If you don't, and you don't work together in partnership and harmony, then you may not have your favorite venue there in 18 months to 2 years time.
And just to echo, just to throw something on there, yeah, you know, I agree completely with Mark and Desi on this. You know, from our standpoint, you know, we've had good partnerships with the venues that we work at, you know, that we have had our events at over the years. And that's been important because everything about what COVID-19 has brought us is changing everything. And I think for us, it's been critical to have a lot of transparency in the economics, because, you know, a hotel coming to us and saying, hey, sign that attrition clause you sign every time. Absolutely not. You know, the venue coming to us and saying, oh yeah, you're going to agree to this food minimum. Absolutely not. And here's why. Yeah, you know, and so everything's different. We're going to commit to transparency. We're going to commit to trying to keep this going. But absolutely not are we going to agree to old world terms. It's a new day now. And just like in so many other areas of our lives, personally and professionally, the trends that we saw emerge pre-COVID have been accelerated by what's happened with this pandemic. And, you know, in many situations, live events needed significant disruption, and they've gotten it. And now it's up to live events that do restart, that have successful restarts, to really understand and zero in on what is the value proposition that you're bringing. Because if it's just strictly informational, good luck with that. That belongs on the internet now. The reason to convene and restart in-person meetings is predominantly, in our estimation, for whatever it's worth, social, community building, and cultivating, and things that drive the culture of a sector and an industry forward, with the information and the program taking a back seat for now. Everybody's had a hard year. The last thing somebody wants to do, you know, maybe other than me, I'm kind of boring, but the last thing that most people want to do is get on a plane and convince their entire legion of stakeholders, their family and their office folks, their coworkers, that they want to do this, and then go and then sit in a conference room for the typical 8 straight hours and receive some download of information. No, that's different too. So, you know, the last thing I'll say on this is that, you know, if you start to unpack the economics of live events, you realize that, you know, it's just real simple. There's less businesses. Many businesses are no longer with us, which is really unfortunate. And with that comes less events. So the demand for venue space is less, and the demand for all these things is less. But the seats at all these events are less. And so, you know, all of these indicators show that if you can manage to restart a meeting that has value, that does all those things, the price, you know, that you're going to be able to charge, if it is something that you're charging for, or you're charging dues for it, or whatever your model is, the value, the underlying economic value of that ticket is higher than it used to be. So there's economics that support the venue, that support the food and the beverage and all that underlying ecosystem. The challenge is this gray area that's between now and then, where we're all muddling through this together, and that's where the partnership has to come in.
Right. You know, what you're saying is it's a whole new value proposition for even holding an event, and then, but there are events happening right now. You know, a lot of them actually, interestingly, in the trade show industry. I think a lot of what you're talking to is a corporate event scenario, and there's an absolute need to see certain you know, product and so forth in person. The trade fair industry, I mean, it's gonna really vary by segment of this industry. So if you were to talk right now about who is meeting right now, Desi, among your clients, can you give me a sense, and Mark, you too, of what industry, you know, what's their segment, who, you know, what kinds of events are happening at the moment?
What we're seeing is a lot of social.
If you don't mind, if the audience wants to use your question box as a chat, I'd love for you to tell me if you're doing an event, a little bit about it.
Yeah, I love that market feedback for sure. Yeah, more social. So the social side of things, the weddings, and you know, people that are comfortable gathering with their, you know, like-minded friends and family type members are not all of them are comfortable meeting, but that's the first segment that we're starting to see come back. And then of course those smaller regional meetings. So, you know, a lot of that was driven by the guidelines that the, you know, local government has put in place. So maybe it's a 10-person meeting, and so we're kind of working within the confines of what's allowable, right? And then we'll start to see, I would say, a few associations starting to pop off, not quite yet corporate, but as I mentioned earlier, I think it's gonna get there. It's just gonna take a lot of examples and information sharing and success stories for those groups to be comfortable, and quite frankly, for those travel bans to be lifted. And so once we get past that point, I think we'll see that corporate segment come back.
And I'll add, again, on a global basis, many of the IAC venues they accommodate a lot of training and professional development. And in terms of critical training, government training, that's where we've seen it rebound the quickest. And in some cases, it hasn't stopped. So we do need to train our critical care workers. We do need to get together and recreate our future and reimagine our products. And so smaller groups have definitely been the fastest to rebound. Interestingly, one statistic that came out just last week, London in the United Kingdom, many of the inquiries are up on this time last year in relation to staff Christmas functions. So think about that for a moment. We can only really align that to the fact they've been away from each other for 6 months. They're looking forward to getting back together as a group, as a community within their businesses. So some positivity there. And then finally, one live example, which I will throw out because I think it is a clear indication of where we will be heading in 2021. One professional global advertising association had their event scheduled in Singapore, 600 people this April, had to do what we all did, cancel it. Has sat on the fence, waiting and waiting and waiting to see if they can reconclude it in 2021, have now taken the decision they're not going to be able to bring 600 people back together in 2021, but they're totally committed to live. So instead of 600 in Singapore, they're going to have 100 in Singapore, 70 in Toronto, 70 in Brussels, all at the same time, interconnected, using a platform and a technology that we've actually been investing in over the summer, which is having smaller live regional events, but importantly, not taking place in isolation, interconnected with content, interconnected with collaboration. That I can see really being a critical pathway to us in 2021. Not now, but it will come.
Yeah, and some of our audience, as the poll showed, you know, is already heading in that direction.
Yeah. That 51%. Already planning hybrid. You're absolutely right. That was a really encouraging number. And 33% regionalizing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we all want to get in that room.
See that too. Just interestingly, as you were talking, obviously people's responses were coming in. and small meeting of about 30 people in the financial services industry, across the board, small, in keeping with the state mandates. That's where we are right now. So we've had a great so far discussion about the overarching situation and so forth. I'd love to get into the people who are on the call are really craving some detail about how to do this once you start. And I'm going to go back to Desi because this is what you do. Question number one had to do with waivers. Have you had experience with waivers, and how does that work? They're required waivers, pre-questionnaires, and then let's move into testing. Can you pre-event testing? Can you give some best practices around those?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I will start off by saying, first of all, that I'm not a lawyer, right? But so when we're talking about waivers and that sort of thing, but I can give you, what we've seen that we think is beneficial. So I would say, from a holistic approach, which is really the foundation of ECI, let's be careful as we move forward. We're hyper focused on COVID, and obviously we're all dealing with this and learning how to kind of manage events and plan for them and whatnot. But let's not forget about all of the other hazards and emergencies that could happen on site at an event. Natural disasters, medical issues, slips, trips and falls, heart attacks, fire, etc. And the list goes on. Exactly. So I just want to kind of lay that foundation there. And then in terms of waivers, and that kind of segues nicely into that thought process, should you have a COVID, waiver, you've really got to talk to your legal counsel about that. But I would just say, be careful. If we really should have waivers, that encompass the entire event, not just COVID, which could be one tiny little piece, right? And so when you're looking at that risk management aspect and moving forward, just be careful that you're not hyper focused on just the one little piece, which is, taking over our lives right now. But it's important, but it's not the end all be all. So that's my suggestion on waivers. And then your second question was
pre-event questionnaires.
Pre-event questionnaires. And so you're meaning in terms of like signs and symptoms and that sort of thing.
Yeah. What do you do to prep people before they even, or what are people doing to prep them before they?
What we're seeing that seems to be working. Yeah, so communication, first of all, as we mentioned earlier, letting the groundwork be very well communicated with everyone. Of course, we see it everywhere we go. If you are experiencing symptoms, don't leave your house. Communicating with that and making sure that the registration policy or process is flexible to accommodate whatever that looks like. Because at the end of the day, if it's a financial decision and someone's got symptoms and they're going to decide to go because of that, we don't want that certainly to come into play. So I would say, that conversation on the front end needs to happen. Everyone needs to have very clear expectations as to what the processes are going to look like. And, the waivers or, the questionnaires are interesting because they're thought provoking, right? You're relying on someone being honest. Half the time, do we even pay attention to how we feel if we're busy? I couldn't tell you if I had a fever right now or not. I probably don't because I'm a healthy person. But when you think about that, don't normally know that I maybe run high as a temperature, when I'm taking that. And so you wouldn't know if you present at a conference and that's what's going on with your personal situation. And so thought-provoking questions, reminders, I think are important. And then what your plan is when you get on site. And of course, the venue is probably going to have a plan like Mark mentioned, but then also making sure that your plan is communicated to your attendees so there's no surprise. So if someone does show up, they get their temperature taken, they're past that, 100.4 threshold, what's your plan after that? And also, if there's, a disgruntled attendee and they're very upset about this situation, how are you going to handle that and making sure that, everyone kind of ends up happy and you're protecting the reputation of the conference at the same time. So lots to be had in all of that conversation.
What is your plan after that? If you have an attendee with a temperature, what do you do?
Well, every planner is going to be different, and so that's something that we would have a conversation about, obviously looking at the size and the scope of the conference. But, our recommendation is certainly, and you've seen this over and over again, and I think I saw this in Mark's information too, but, let's do it twice, right? So let's take that temperature, let's have a minute, let's, I don't want to say segregate, but let's move to a more isolated area, kind of have some water, chill out, do that temperature again if that's what you're focused on. And then that conversation will depend on what you've already decided on before you even get to that point, which is, do we, have someone like an ECI team there to, facilitate them if it's not a 911 emergency situation? Do we go to the hospital if they're really feeling absolutely terrible? Do we disinvite them from the conference and invite them, and let them know the registration fee is coming back to them? But then, you just have to be very careful as to what that total exposure looks like, and, what that reach has been. And then, of course, watching signs and symptoms of the rest of the attendees as you go through, if you decide you're going to continue with the event, or if you decide that, what is your threshold for canceling, depending on signs and symptoms that are being reported.
Right.
And then you had one more question.
No, that was basic. I think you got
it. Is that it? Okay.
Yeah. I'm getting a lot of people who want to talk about, so they've passed their tests and they're in the meeting. Meeting room configurations. I'm seeing software that helps you prep for, the size and the regulations where you are and so forth. Have you gotten to that point with anything you're doing, Bradley, where you've actually planned out a meeting space with COVID regulations?
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk about? Yeah.
Sure, and I'll touch on waivers too.
Go back to waivers, yeah.
Yeah, because my opinion is waivers are probably going to be with us for a while, until there's a number of things that could happen to cause that to be less important. No need to go down that rabbit hole. I think that I completely agree with Desi. Having a waiver that covers everything, including COVID, is important. And it's important to sponsors, with the lens for us being corporate events and trade show-ish sort of stuff. Your sponsors, your partners, everybody wants to know that you're not going to find, opportunists trying to show up and throw a monkey wrench into things, but just more so just people having that right mindset when they arrive. And I think that there's things that events can do that really haven't been thought through all the way to that involve registration fees that could encourage that behavior. I sort of think about, if somebody realizes that they're sick in the hotel room, they have a decision to make. They've traveled to be part of the conference in theory. They're sick in their hotel room. They're either going to come to the conference, or they're going to say, you know what, I'm too sick, I can't do it. And I think, for people on this webinar and people thinking about this sort of thing, you've got to think critically about putting the right incentives in place to where people can opt out, and save them the trouble of showing up, because it's not them, it's everybody else watching what you do with them that's going to be the problem. You can't show them benevolence, because if you do, you're going to have 100 other people who are angry that you would dare let that person out of the room that you set aside for them to try to feel better, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a challenging environment, but you just try to think through the psychology of it. And yes, in terms of the layout, we have gotten to that point. What we were going to do, both in Boston with our show in August that did not take place, the reason it didn't take place is, like I spoke to, the will was gone. And also, lest I leave out that Boston had, at that point in time, had a 14-day quarantine on anybody coming in and out of the city for numerous states. That is the definition of a deal breaker. And then for Nashville, which is where our event was supposed to be in September, that we just did, Digital Book World, in both situations, we had moved them from their original venue to be in an outdoor space. In Nashville, there's a great place called Arrington Vineyards that's south of the city that we were going to use. And in Boston, there was a place called Boston Winery that has an outdoor setup. And the idea of having events in outdoor open air spaces, still with distancing, as you might imagine, but the psychology of that was sound. that was met with a positive response. It just for other reasons couldn't happen. And I think, you know, when we look forward to 2021, just for us, because what we're in the middle of planning right now is Project Voice, which is our big event. That event's going to have 3 components. An outdoor meeting will figure large in one of them, where there's going to be an indoor conference that'll be open to a certain number of people, where we're going to space out the seats, we're going to space out the booths, we're going to make sure everything's clean. The Chattanooga Convention Center is going to have fresh air piped in, which they're able to do, all these different sorts of things. Yeah, and that'll be April 12th to the 14th. Then there will be a virtual component that'll be April 15th and 16th called Project Voice Worldwide. That'll be 48 hours of content all across the world. And then preceding that, leading up to it, will be what we call Project Voice Coast to Coast, which will be a road show, which I and many others will go on. That'll be 30+ dates of visiting different, predominantly open air, but not in every situation, cities across the United States. And you know, you can think about, as Mark was talking about, the regional approach of breaking up into smaller groups. It's sort of our version of that, except sort of asynchronous, different groups at different times. And those 3 things together constitute what used to be the singular event. And I think that, you know, that ought to be called a hybrid event. And I think hybrid events are what everybody will at least have to give a lot of thought to moving forward.
Absolutely.
As part of our IAC's Critical Pathway to Reopening Conference and Meeting Venues Guide, which we launched or published in July, a big portion of that was the meeting environment and the meeting design, because that when we do bring people back together, that's critical in a number of ways. And I'll give you some examples, because they're not rocket science, but they're very easy to do. So one of the things you're looking to do is to create a sense of confidence and trust by reducing all of the touch points. Everything that's touchless is a positive. But when you think about a traditional meeting, you have a plenary room, tables, chairs, consumables, then you have breakouts. So they all leave that room and go into the breakouts, and then they go to the break station, and then they go to lunch. It is a hugely complex set of logistics moving people around. However, if you do some pretty fundamental but simple things like create a plenary room that can also be your breakout space, with a clever setup within that. So take away all of the tables, have only chairs, make it almost like a boxing ring, in the sense of your panel or your presenters are right in the center, and you just have chairs around the outside. And then when you decide to break into small groups of 4, 5, or 6, you can literally have the audience just turn to each other in 4s, staying in the same chair. And by the way, that chair has also got your little label on the back where you've written your name, because of course that you want that to always be your chair. Or even if you're going to get really technical, you put in there like a banquet style flip chart and pad, which shows the seating plan for those people who do forget after lunch exactly where they were in the room. So there are elements like that. Think of the breaks, think of the footfall in the venue. Everything is about traffic these days, and reducing the amount of traffic and concentration of delegates. Desi's nodding away there, so I can tell that this really plays right into her, into her area of expertise. But something simple, I've seen solutions where your breakfast is actually a lovely wooden board with your continental, your meats, your pastries, your yogurt, and you literally have to your table brought your one breakfast platter. That's just one interaction between the waiting staff and the attendee. I've seen great little mini picnic boxes that have been made for the morning breaks. So again, you only have to pick that one box up for your morning break, and it's got your muffin in there, your fresh fruit, your juices. It's got everything just to be able to pick that up. And to Bradley's point, getting outside is massive, because if you've got a venue where there is an outdoor element or even a social open plan element, that's where your delegates want to gravitate to. So give them something like a mini picnic, even at the break time. They will go to those areas and they will disperse. Like I say, none of these are really expensive, highly complex things to deliver, and the venues will do it. You've just got to build that into your program with those sort of mindsets, you know, as you plan the attendees' experience and walk through the day.
We're only limited by our own creativity in this, right?
Okay,
and so,
that's the word I was going to say.
and the biggest thing, to your point, Mark, it's really all about flow management and traffic and just dissecting that agenda and reducing the, you know, the touch points and the big congregations of people. And, you know, so yeah, I love that continental breakfast idea. Same with breaks. You could do a fun little bento box, you know, break that's already preset. That keeps it easy and keeps people, you know, kind of in their spots. Assigned seats are awesome, especially if you've got, you know, a big group where, of course, you've got maybe your one classroom table where you're the only person at. But then if you have multiple meal functions and there's 3 or 4 of you at a table, you're reducing your overall exposure by keeping with the same 3 or 4 people, and then certainly keeping your distance, you know, beyond that.
Yeah.
And yeah, just being creative and looking for those opportunities to be spatially aware. You know, bars, people need to be reminded to keep their distance. And I've seen it at restaurants. I've seen restaurants do it well, where you walk up and maybe you're getting a beer or whatnot at a brewery, and they're very good at enforcing and saying, okay, hey, you know, here's 6 feet distance, you know, just gentle reminders like keep your space and whatnot. And then there's others that don't provide the structure and the enforcement, where people are just all over the place because we're human, you know, nature response, we're habits, you know, we're forgetting to pay attention to these things. And some people are comfortable with it and other people are like, whoa, keep these people away, you know, and making sure that the people that are just barely comfortable being there, you know, that we're taking care of them and providing for the best opportunity for them to have that safe experience. One thing that keeps coming up, generally speaking, is, you know, as you're looking at that flow of traffic, starting from the very beginning. So what time are the attendees going to be leaving their guest rooms? And if you're in a high-rise hotel or an elevator hotel, for example, how are they getting to that point? Are they all coming at the same time? And how are you going to accommodate for the rush of traffic when now an elevator, you know, typical suggestions are that it's 1 family per elevator or people that travel together, or they've got, you know, I saw it at the airport, they've got a sticker over here in this corner, a sticker over here in this corner, and they're trying to keep people, you know, apart and with the instructions outside. And of course, the attendees get to decide if they want to abide by those rules or not. But, you know, that's something that we need to think about as we're moving, you know, not even massive numbers of people, but even, let's say, 100. And how do we accommodate for when everyone is gathering in a certain space, making sure there is plenty of space behind or to the side, and making sure that we're controlling that flow, because bottlenecks can happen easily, and that's where people are really going to get uncomfortable.
I think Desi.
Right. Go right ahead.
Okay, just to touch on what you know, Desi brought up something that I think is really fundamental to everybody who's on this webinar and anybody thinking about doing something even remotely called restarting meetings. Is, you know, it's the psychology of the leadership and the team executing the event, because you know, Desi was talking about how some restaurants you go to, they're all in lockstep with one another. The rules are made clear, the expectations are made clear, and there's consistent execution. And then you go to other businesses and other sorts of organizations, there is none of that.
Right.
And so you get what you get. And you know, I have a memory, you know, in Nashville. Nashville was one of the first places to lift the ban on doing things partially, and one of the first places you could go to a restaurant. And my wife has been very paranoid about COVID from the start, and yet it surprised me. She said, I got to go to a restaurant, I'm just going crazy. I'm like, okay. So we went to, you know, a restaurant that we like to go to, and I'm talking the moment you even approach it, the general manager's out there with the temperature check. You come on in, the staff, masks, everything spread out. I mean, you know, everything in sync, and everything done right and done well. And with events, people are going to look to you as the leadership for that North Star, for that guidance. And if your team, you have somebody who is not taking it seriously, or you know, your team's got dissension, and some people think it ought to be this way and other people think it ought to be this way, all of that's just going to result in absolute disaster as meetings start to come back. It's really important everybody's on the same page, and what Desi was talking about really reminded me of that point and just speaks to that.
And inconsistency does not breed confidence. So you're quite right. One other quick takeaway, perhaps for the audience, because we are going to return to meetings, but the Rizzo Conference Center in Raleigh, North Carolina, they've been running a number of meetings. They actually did all the pre-packaged breaks and made it really easy for people to grab and go. But the one thing they forgot early on was that still our social credentials are really important, and our impact when it comes to sustainability. So everything was packaged with plastic, and they had one of their conferences asked to change that immediately. They did not want that the second day, so they needed to revert to biodegradable materials. So just as we move quickly to find a solution to solve one issue, let's remember that some of those things that were important to us as individuals in the past are just as important, or maybe even more so, when we saw how quickly we were filling up our trash cans at home after being isolated for 6 months. Our impact on the world is still important, so something for us to consider.
And in fact, at Prevue, we just had that discussion, so stay tuned for articles on that topic. I agree with you. I want the audience to know, I had mentioned at the beginning we'd be doing a Q&A at the end, but I've just incorporated your questions into the conversation because we really kind of took it through the flow of a meeting. We have not touched on one point that is extremely important, so I'd like to wrap up with that, and that has to do with everything we're suggesting. These are smart and smart moves, and we have to do them, but how does it impact meeting budgets? And are there ways to do a lot of this, where you're not spending more money? And maybe you could give me some examples. Who would like to speak to that? I see Bradley nodding his head.
Oh yeah, I can speak. That's a healthy part of every day for me right now. As we're looking ahead to next year, and this event I've talked about that we're doing in April. You have to be willing to flex the muscle required with your everybody up and down the value chain with your event. So ideally, you've been doing events for a while. The venue team that you're hosting the event at. The nearby hotels. Your favorite catering, this, that, and the other. But you have to approach that contracting. The contracting's part of it, and even before that, just the philosophical agreement on what matters and what doesn't. If there's one thing we've seen with COVID over and over again, it's illustrated to humanity what matters and what doesn't. And events are no different. You have to all be in sync on what matters. And when I say what matters, I don't mean to you, I mean what matters to the attendee who's making that, what may be a controversial decision in their household to come to your meeting that you've restarted, and what doesn't. And just do the best you can. But with the full recognition that you're gonna have more people as you approach the date who are going to have challenges. You're going to be challenged on your refund policy, if whatever that is. Typically for us, it's no refunds whatsoever for any reason, and we'll credit you towards something else. We've had to loosen that. We had to loosen a lot of things, and that's just baking that flexibility in economics-wise into your business is pretty important.
I think maybe I would add slightly different point to Bradley's, which is invest the time in working out what you need that's different for your meeting environments today, and see if the venues have that in inventory and can provide that for you as a service, because you're hiring in technology, production skills, different aspects that were never a consideration in the past, and there's such a variation in prices. I heard one project being briefed out for a hybrid element, and the same project brief had quotes everything from $1,000 to $100,000 from different companies. There's a huge gray area that people, you know, have not got the background. So look to what the venue can provide, see if they can provide some of that new normal for you, because if they can, it undoubtedly is going to be more cost effective for you, and you can invest in other areas then.
Right. Desi, you want to finish up, since we're giving advice on, you know, kind of how to keep within your budget, or, you know, make this doable financially?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I obviously can't speak, you know, to the venue pricing and that sort of thing, but what I will say is, you know, we all need to be fiscally responsible, right? And so I actually forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about the kind of COVID response, in the toolbar, there's a handout section that actually has our COVID-19 medical contingency plan. So if you're a planner or a venue, or you just want some guidance, please download that. And of course, you can email me with any questions. And then certainly, you know, if you are not sure where to go, or you have questions, get an expert involved. And I don't feel like, because of these you know, new situations that we're in, that we have to spend a ton more money. Let's just get creative and figure out what your budget is, and work with the venue and work with everyone in order to make the meeting happen. Because I think at this point we are all vested, you know, none of us are looking to lose money, but let's evolve this together and just be creative and, you know, get meetings happening and get people comfortable traveling again. I think that as coming together as a, you know, an industry is what's going to take us to that next level.
And these are the skills that we have in this industry. We just are applying them differently. I have complete confidence that we're going to have a lot of solutions coming up as meetings reopen. At Prevue, we're committed to sharing them through articles and white papers. We're going to be doing webinars like these on hybrid meetings. I've got another on duty of care that's coming up next month. I encourage you to check out our website, prevuemeetings.com. We are flat out of time. So I just want to thank you so much, Desi Whitney, Mark Cooper, Bradley Metrock. What an incredible conversation. And thanks for being here. Thank you to the audience, and everybody enjoy the rest of your day.
Great to chat. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Barbara.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
You got it.